What happens when a fashion empire loses sight of its true vision? Welcome to a story of betrayal, ambition, and redemption in the world of high fashion. Celeste Couture was once a powerhouse of creativity, but behind the scenes, corruption and favoritism were stifling real talent. When Adrian, the undercover CEO, stepped into the studio, he discovered a toxic culture that rewarded connections over skill. But would he have the courage to take back control and rebuild the brand on integrity? Stay tuned to uncover the truth behind this dramatic transformation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Adrian Blackwell sat in his sleek, glass-walled office, overlooking the city skyline, but his focus wasn't on the breathtaking view, it was on the growing pile of reports in front of him. Celeste Couture, the luxury fashion brand he had built from the ground up, was unraveling. Once a powerhouse in high fashion, known for its innovation and timeless elegance, the company was now struggling. Customer complaints flooded in, collections lacked creativity, runways were delayed, and worst of all, the brand was losing relevance. Employees were leaving at an alarming rate, and top designers who once shaped the company's iconic identity were quitting without warning. Adrian had asked his senior team for answers, but all he got were excuses. Elliot Marston, the VP of Design, blamed the downturn on shifting industry trends and a more competitive market. But Adrian knew better. Celeste Couture's decline wasn't about competition. It was about something rotting from within. He had spent years fostering a culture of creativity and excellence. Yet somewhere along the way, the company had lost its soul. The flagship design studio, once a beacon of artistic energy, now felt lifeless, according to whispers among industry insiders. Adrian wasn't the type of CEO to sit back and rely on secondhand reports. He needed to see it for himself. That's when he made his decision. He would go undercover as Elias Carter, a junior designer. With a rugged beard, casual attire, and no trace of his usual polished image, he would enter his own company unnoticed. If there was toxicity brewing in his design studio, he would find it. If leadership was failing, he would expose it. And if Celeste Couture was truly falling apart, he would tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up. Taking a deep breath, Adrian slid his designer watch into a drawer. For now, the CEO of Celeste Couture would disappear. It was time for Elias Carter to step onto the studio floor. Adrian, now Elias Carter, stepped through the heavy glass doors of Celeste Couture's flagship design studio, taking in the space that had once been the beating heart of the brand. The energy was nothing like he remembered. Gone was the vibrant hum of creativity, the sound of sewing machines humming in sync, and the excited chatter of designers bouncing ideas off each other. Instead, the air was heavy, filled with quiet tension and exhaustion. His first test came at the front desk. The receptionist barely looked up from her phone. "Yeah," she muttered, chewing gum as if she had no interest in the job. Adrian, used to being greeted with respect as the CEO, was caught off guard by the indifference. "I'm here for the junior designer role," he said, keeping his tone neutral. She sighed, tapped a few keys on her computer, then pointed toward a side door. "Go to the workroom. Someone will tell you what to do." No welcome, no introduction, just a dismissive gesture, as if he were another disposable intern. As Adrian walked deeper into the studio, he passed rows of fabric samples and half-finished gowns draped on mannequins. A few designers sat hunched over their desks, their expressions strained. No one looked up. No one smiled. The creative energy that once defined this place had been replaced by a suffocating atmosphere of exhaustion and indifference. His first real interaction came when he introduced himself to a group of junior designers working at a long table. A woman with sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes, Madeline, a senior designer, glanced up and sighed. "Another newbie? Great," she muttered, rolling her eyes before turning back to her sketchbook. Her tone wasn't welcoming, it was laced with annoyance. One of the junior designers, a young man named Lucas, leaned over and whispered, "Don't take it personally. We go through new people fast. Most don't last more than a month." Adrian frowned. "Why?" Lucas hesitated, then shrugged. "Management doesn't care about us. You'll see." Adrian clenched his jaw. He had come here looking for problems, and within minutes he had already found them. If this was how new talent was treated, it was no surprise Celeste Couture was on the brink of collapse. Adrian, still undercover as Elias, quickly realized that Celeste Couture's biggest problem wasn't just a lack of inspiration, it was a culture of exploitation. The designers weren't just overworked, they were burnt out, undervalued, and barely holding on. Instead of an environment that nurtured creativity, the studio had become a relentless machine, squeezing every ounce of energy from its staff without giving anything back. It became painfully clear on his first real project. He was assigned to assist on a new collection under Madeline, the senior designer. The deadline was brutal. Only 2 weeks to finalize designs, source materials, and begin production. But what shocked Adrian the most was the complete disregard for the well-being of the team. "Don't expect to leave before midnight," Lucas muttered as they sorted fabric swatches. "Not unless you want Madeline breathing down your neck." Adrian thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. That night, the entire studio was still packed with exhausted designers, hunched over their desks, dark circles under their eyes. No one dared to complain, not even when their hands cramped from hours of sketching, or when the fabric-cutting team struggled to keep their eyes open. This wasn't passion, it was survival. But the worst part? The credit was never theirs. Adrian noticed how junior designers, especially those like Lucas who had an eye for detail, were constantly overlooked. He watched as Madeline snatched a beautifully draped gown concept from a junior team member, barely acknowledging his work. Instead, she took the design to the executives as if it were her own, soaking up the praise while the real talent faded into the background. "This happens all the time," Lucas said bitterly. "You work yourself to the bone and they take the credit. If you speak up, you're out." Adrian's stomach churned. He had built Celeste Couture to empower designers, to be a place where talent was recognized and nurtured. Now it had become a battlefield where only the most cutthroat personalities thrived. The passion for fashion had been replaced by a toxic hierarchy, where only those willing to step on others made it to the top. As he looked around at the exhausted faces of his colleagues, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a broken system, it was a sinking ship. And if he didn't step in soon, Celeste Couture wouldn't just lose its soul, it would collapse entirely. The final straw came when Celeste Couture's executive team announced an internal design competition. It was pitched as an opportunity for junior designers to showcase their talent, with the winner earning a coveted feature in the next high-profile collection. For many, it was a chance to finally get recognized, a rare moment where skill mattered more than office politics. Lucas, along with several other junior designers, poured everything they had into their submissions. Sketches filled every desk, fabrics were carefully selected, and long nights were spent perfecting every detail. The excitement in the air was palpable. For the first time, the designers had a glimmer of hope that their hard work might finally pay off. But Adrian, still posing as Elias, sensed something wasn't right. The day before the final presentation, he overheard Madeline speaking with one of the executives. "We're still going with my design, right?" she asked casually. "Of course," the executive replied. "The competition's just for morale. We'll give them a nice speech, pick a runner-up, but the final showcase will be yours." Adrian felt his blood turn cold. The competition had been a lie from the start. The next day, the betrayal unfolded exactly as he feared. One by one, the designers presented their concepts, each pouring their heart into their work. Lucas, in particular, had created a breathtaking avant-garde piece, one that Adrian knew could redefine the brand's identity. But when the final decision was announced, Madeline's pre-selected design was declared the winner. Gasps filled the room. Lucas's face fell. The other designers exchanged glances, their excitement crumbling into quiet resignation. They had been set up, tricked into believing they had a chance, only to be discarded yet again. Adrian clenched his fists. He had built Celeste Couture to elevate rising talent, to give designers a space where their creativity was celebrated, not stolen. And now, the very people who had poured their souls into their work were being cheated and silenced. Lucas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice was raw, filled with exhaustion and frustration. "Why do we even bother?" he muttered, shaking his head. It doesn't matter how hard we work, it's already decided. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. No one argued, because they all knew he was right. Adrian exhaled slowly, realization sinking in. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was corruption. And if Celeste Couture had any hope of survival, the truth needed to come out. Now. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Lucas's words still lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the deep betrayal within Celeste Couture. The competition had been a farce, the designers exploited, and talent ignored in favor of personal favoritism. Adrian, still disguised as Elias, felt the weight of their disappointment. But he was done watching from the sidelines. It was time to end this charade. He stood, adjusting the glasses that had helped obscure his identity for the past several weeks. The room was still filled with the echoes of murmured frustrations when Adrian spoke, his voice clear and deliberate. "That's enough." All eyes turned toward him. Madeline crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "Oh, what now, another tantrum?" Adrian smirked. "Not quite. More like an intervention." And with that, he reached up and removed his glasses, running a hand through his hair as he dropped the pretense. The reaction was immediate. The junior designers gasped. The executives shifted in their seats, eyes wide with disbelief. Lucas took a step back, his expression frozen in shock. But the one who reacted the most? Madeline. Her confident smirk wavered, replaced by a mask of panic as the realization sank in. Elias wasn't some unknown freelancer. He was Adrian Carter, the founder of Celeste Couture, the man whose name was sewn into every piece of clothing they designed, the man who had built this empire from the ground up. The room fell into stunned silence. Then Adrian spoke, his voice cold and unwavering. "I've seen everything. The disrespect, the exploitation, the corruption. This is not the company I built." He turned toward the executives. "You let this happen under your watch. You dismissed complaints, overlooked talent, and allowed this toxic culture to thrive." His gaze locked onto Madeline. "And you turned my company into your personal playground, rigging competitions and stealing opportunities from people who deserved them." Madeline's face turned pale. "Adrian, Save it," he cut her off, his voice sharp. "You manipulated the system, crushed the very people who make this company what it is. But that ends today." A hush fell over the room. No one dared to speak. Adrian had just detonated the truth, and now it was time to rebuild from the wreckage. With one final glance at the stunned crowd before him, he made his decision. The corruption would be torn out at its roots, starting now. The weight of Adrian's words still hung in the air as silence stretched across the studio. The empire he had built had rotted from the inside out, but now, with the truth laid bare, the process of rebuilding could begin. The executives, previously smug in their positions, now exchanged uneasy glances. They knew change was inevitable. Adrian wasn't the kind of leader who delivered empty threats. He had exposed the rot, and now he was going to cut it out completely. His first action was swift and decisive. Madeline was fired on the spot. Her influence had poisoned the culture at Celeste Couture for too long, and her blatant corruption in rigging competitions was the final straw. She tried to defend herself, to paint her actions as necessary decisions, but the evidence was undeniable. Adrian didn't waste time listening to excuses. He simply gestured toward the door. "Pack your things. You're done here." With Madeline gone, the executives sat stiffly, waiting for their turn under the fire. Adrian turned his gaze to them next. "This happened on your watch," he stated. "Every time an employee raises concerns, you dismiss them. Every time talent was overlooked, you stayed silent. If you're not prepared to uphold the integrity of this company, you can leave now." A few of them, realizing their time was up, stood and left without another word. Others, desperate to salvage their careers, pledged to work under Adrian's new direction. He accepted their words cautiously, but with a warning: prove it, or you're next. But the biggest change wasn't at the executive level. Adrian turned his focus to the real heart of Celeste Couture, the designers, the creatives, the ones who had been ignored and dismissed. He called a meeting, inviting them to speak freely. For the first time in years, voices that had been silenced finally had the chance to be heard. Salaries were reviewed, work hours were adjusted to be fair, overtime was now compensated properly, promotions would be based on talent, not politics, and most importantly, creativity, not corporate favoritism, would drive the brand forward again. Lucas, the designer who had been wronged in the rigged competition, was reinstated and promoted. "You won because you deserved it," Adrian told him, "and no one will ever take that from you again." As the changes unfolded, a shift could be felt throughout Celeste Couture. The fear that once loomed over the office was replaced with hope. For the first time in years, the company was on its way back to being what it was meant to be, a place where true talent thrived. And Adrian? He vowed never to turn a blind eye again. As the runway lights illuminated the grand hall of Celeste Couture's flagship event, all eyes were on the debut of Sienna's first official collection. It wasn't just another showcase, it was a statement, a symbol of everything that had changed. The whispers of uncertainty that had once filled the studio were now replaced with anticipation and excitement. The same designers who had once been dismissed, overlooked, or forced into silence now stood proudly, watching their work come to life on the runway. Sienna, standing backstage, took a deep breath. Months ago, she had been just another designer fighting to be noticed in a system designed to suppress her. Now, she was leading the creative vision of Celeste Couture's future. With Adrian's unwavering support and the elimination of toxic leadership, she had been given the chance to create freely, for the first time without fear of sabotage, favoritism, or stolen credit. The collection itself spoke volumes. Gone were the uninspired, recycled trends that had dominated past seasons under Madeline's rule. Instead, Sienna's designs were bold, fresh, and unapologetically innovative, each piece reflecting the creativity and resilience of the team behind it. Intricate embroidery, daring silhouettes, and powerful colors graced the runway, telling a story not just of fashion, but of rebirth. This was more than a collection, it was proof that real talent, when given the chance, would always outshine manipulation and favoritism. As the final model took her walk, the audience erupted into applause, first a polite ripple, then a thunderous ovation. Sienna stepped forward, overwhelmed by the realization that this moment was hers. She wasn't a shadow in the background anymore. She wasn't the designer who had to fight for scraps. She was now the face of Celeste Couture's creative revolution. Adrian, watching from the front row, caught her eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that this was only the beginning. Celeste Couture had nearly crumbled under corruption, but now it was thriving under authenticity. That night, as Sienna stood under the bright lights, she knew one thing for sure. Fashion wasn't just about fabric and stitches, it was about the people behind it. And finally, they had a voice. As the lights dimmed and the last echoes of applause faded, Adrian stood at the edge of the runway, taking it all in. Celeste Couture had survived its darkest chapter not just by replacing a corrupt leader, but by redefining what leadership truly meant. Fashion had always been about vision, but real success, lasting success, came from empowering the people behind the designs. In the months that followed, Celeste Couture underwent a complete transformation. New policies ensured that credit was given where it was due, contracts were rewritten to protect designers, and a mentorship program was introduced to nurture young talent rather than exploit it. No longer would creativity be stifled by corporate greed. The studio was now a place where passion and hard work were recognized, celebrated, and rewarded. Sienna, once an overlooked designer, was now at the forefront of Celeste Couture's creative direction. Her first collection had been a statement, but it was just the beginning. With Adrian's trust and the right team by her side, she was determined to ensure that Celeste Couture never lost sight of what made it great: its people. As Adrian walked through the bustling studio a few days later, he noticed something that had been missing before. Laughter, energy, excitement. Designers collaborated without fear. Interns spoke up without hesitation, and the tension that had once poisoned the workplace was gone. This wasn't just a business revival, it was a cultural shift. Looking out at the skyline from his office, Adrian knew his job as CEO was far from over. Leadership wasn't about standing in the spotlight. It was about making sure the right people had a chance to shine. Celeste Couture was no longer just his legacy. It belonged to every designer, every artist, and every creative mind that made it thrive. And as long as he was in charge, he would never let them be silenced again. The story of Celeste Couture's revival teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, integrity, and the value of the people behind a brand. Adrian entered the studio expecting minor issues, but uncovered deep-rooted corruption that had stifled creativity and talent. His journey showed that a company's success isn't just about its reputation, it's about how it treats the people who make that reputation possible. One of the biggest takeaways is that true leadership isn't about control, but empowerment. Adrian didn't just remove a toxic figure, he built a culture where designers felt valued, ideas were respected, and talent was nurtured instead of exploited. By listening, taking action, and holding people accountable, he turned a broken system into a thriving one. Sienna's rise also proves that hard work and talent should always triumph over favoritism. She had the skills and vision but was overlooked, until a leader gave her the opportunity she deserved. Her success symbolizes how a business flourishes when it invests in the right people. Ultimately, the story teaches that a brand is only as strong as the people behind it. And when leadership puts people first, success follows naturally.